Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're breaking down every Warbond in Helldivers 2 to help save you super credits and find what's best for your personal playstyle. We'll cover each weapon, armor, grenade, and booster that comes with them, and I have a few different priority lists that are based on like favorite faction, general use for opening up the most playstyles possible to get tons of fun things to play with and focus on like what you need in random queue games, and then what I would personally pick up in order on a fresh account to have my favorite loadouts for super Helldive and turning the game into a horde shooter because I always go by what's best at blasting. But before we start on login, everyone has access to this free Warbond, and it has a bunch of highlight weapons like the Diligence Counter Sniper, which is an amazing medium penetration rifle that is ridiculously good at dealing with every mid-tier enemy. And all the way at the bottom, we have the Scorcher. This is one of the weapons that's basically S tier against all three factions, but it's lower priority to rush towards because you need a ridiculous amount of medals to get to it as a new player, and you can pick something like the Purifier up a lot faster. What I really think you should focus on more than anything in the free Warbond is the boosters. The big four in the game are Health Pod Space Optimization on page 3, Vitality Enhancement on page 4, and Stamina Enhancement on page 7, with Experimental Infusion coming from Viper Commandos, but we'll cover that later. It's just important to note because these four boosters combined drastically change the flow of the game on the hardest difficulty, and it's very noticeable to not have one of them running. So lighting this off will lock in what I think is the worst value premium Warbond for like unlocking playstyles early on, but gets substantially better once you have most of the other stuff. So Truth Enforcers has this unflinching armor passive, which is effectively worthless because there's no heavy variant. The only time it really mattered to use was on the bots. And even then, it still doesn't do enough to be noticeable because if you are getting hit by the bots in this armor, you're just going to stim anyways and not shoot back. And in the light armor, you basically just evaporate trying to take shots to use the passive. Drip-wise, though, I will say this Warbond is S tier, no questions asked. Some of these armor sets look amazing, and the true end game of like any game is collecting. I also personally use the black and red skins for all my ships and all my stuff because I think it looks the coolest. So I do think that you get the maximum drip value from this Warbond, but it also does come with those three weapons. The Halt Shotgun is something that takes some time getting used to, and it is also pretty niche for a lot of people, but you can slam 16 shots off without reloading once. You get 8 in each chamber, so you can toggle from stun to flechette, and you also get the single reload, so you can run and gun super easily, and the damage on the flechette rounds is really solid. But I really like setting enemies up with the stun shot. It feels really good to do later on in the game for some niche builds, and I think as you play the game more, the Halt Shotgun feels substantially better to use. Now, the Reprimand is just a love it or hate it SMG. It just goes both ways. The bullets have crazy bloom, so like 1 in 10 shots just completely miss for no reason sometimes. And this weapon mandatorily needs the siege armor passive to activate it properly, but once you get it, the medium penetration on the SMG actually feels really good. The last thing we get is this Loyalist pistol, which if you fully charge all 7 shots per magazine, it actually puts in like a crazy amount of work. It's just basically a tiny purifier that a lot of people really like using, including myself. And I think in general, it's just a really good pistol that just gets overshadowed by some of the other things for a lot of situations because people just don't really like using it. The last thing we get in this Warbond is the Dead Sprint booster, and it's basically a dead slot once you learn the basics of movement. Sprinting down your stamina bar and then stimming to reset it is basically how we've used heavy armor the entire time. And once you start playing on bots on the hardest difficulty, which is my main faction, missing 1 point of HP is an automatic stim because so many of us are used to dying in one hit below anything that isn't max HP. And by habit, you end up stimming the damage that Dead Sprint does to you pretty much instantly, which resets your stamina anyways, completely defeating the purpose of bringing this booster in like altogether. So once you get to that point of the game, like the better you get, the worse Dead Sprint gets. And I think when we talk about Truth Enforcers as a whole, it's a Warbond that's only good after you get other Warbonds, and that's why it's at the bottom of the list. The next 5 Warbonds are going to be interchangeable to some level depending on your playstyle, and that's reflected in the prior list at the end. So next up we have Freedom's Flame. This is the Fire Warbond that had tons of controversy around its pre-nerfs, but they mostly fixed it. You get 3 weapons again, and unfortunately literally the worst booster in the game. A lot of times if you take in Firebomb Hellpods, you just get instantly kicked from the lobby because it kills Helldivers more than enemies. And I know some people are going to be like, he is gatekeeping. They're trolling, like actually trolling. It is basically only used on the disposables for a challenge run, and I think this booster actively makes the game worse when it's active. It's also been bugged in one way or another for ages to make your Hellpods do less damage, so keep that in mind. You also get a few of the inflammable armors that cut fire damage taken by 75%, but you don't get a heavy variant in the Warbond, which I think every Warbond should give you a light, medium, heavy variant. So in this case, I would rather just use the kill zone armor and take the 25% hit, or lock in the heavy when it's in the superstore rotation. Gun-wise, the Crisper is actually a pretty good sidearm at shutting down areas, but the limited ammo just makes it feel bad to use, and it's not something I'm personally ever looking for a sidearm to even do for my builds, and the vast majority of my community's feedback is exactly the same, as it's just a weird pistol. As for the Torture, though, this thing is just basically a primary flamethrower with some slightly different nuances, like shooting hulks in the eyes or the legs compared to the flamethrower, but again, most people aren't really bringing a flamethrower to boss unless you're doing like a challenge run or are just a real firefighter. For the most part, though, I think it's really good at area denial and melts pretty much everything very similar to the flamethrower, and it gets super activated by the siege armor passive. Next up is the Cookout, and this is one of the flat-out best weapons in the game for kill farming. Single reload is amazing for kiting, and anything you cleave with it rots out to burn damage. It also has like amazing stagger, so it's just a better punisher across the board, and it's one of my favorite weapons to bring into the bugs and squids for racking up tons of kills. So I think this Warbond is a really solid pickup if you like fire. I just think it relies on, again, other Warbonds to make the most out of it. Chemical Agents is next up, and this Warbond comes with 2 stratagems, a sidearm, and the god tier gas grenade. In your loadouts, there is only ever really 3 relevant grenades to think about, and gas is one of them. On all 3 factions, it's just amazing at area denial and is just a better stun grenade for the most part. It rots out almost every light medium that it's taking on, and it also confuses them so they randomly attack in weird directions. They used to attack each other, but they kind of took that out for whatever reason, and this effectively replaced a stun grenade for almost everyone. It also got buffed to have enough demo force to destroy all spawners, and with that being said, this is also the only reason to get this Warbond because for the rest of it feels so bad to use. The stim pistol, while being really fun for firefighters and Nikola Tesla builds, is effectively useless in random games because most of the time when you stim pistol someone, they just kill you for whatever reason. Like, I don't understand that, but it also, on top of that, is also fairly hard to hit people with. I really think they need to adopt like the stim pistol from like Battlefield 2042 or just basically any other stim pistol that works properly. The armor is also just completely outclassed by the kill zone drip, so there's no reason to ever really wear the armor from this Warbond to reduce gas damage. Moving on, when we talk about the Sterilize, it really gives you the Zoolander vibe where all the boys are running around spraying each other with gas. But it is actually pretty good at shooting into bug breaches and rotting out light enemies. It's just outside of that, anything this can do, you would just want to take the flamethrower for because it's just substantially better. And one of the key problems for me with the sterilizers is it doesn't leave a gas cloud behind when you shoot it at a spot, like at all. So I think it feels really bad to use. We also do have the gas guard dog, which is a single target guard dog that flies off into the middle of nowhere. This super helpful good boy is just always doing his best and failing, which feels really bad. And it honestly feels like a dead slot when you take this in as a backpack compared to the other 2. I also really think you are exclusively buying this Warbond for the gas grenade, but it's so good that it's hard to not want to buy this. Next up, we have Viper Commandos. You get the PP armor, which everyone is using for jousting, 2 sidearms, a primary, and the god tier experimental infusion booster, which lets you tank through some absolutely ridiculous situations and activates heavy armor into being like obnoxiously strong. Explosive res armor with this booster effectively makes you unkillable as long as you have the stim running, and movement speed just feels amazing anytime you can get even a little bit more of it. The booster dynamically changes the flow of the game, and it's something we used for a very long time to brute force bot fights. And it's just amazing on every faction across the board. It's so noticeable when this isn't online that I think that in general, you need to make sure that you're having this in most of your games. Unfortunately, when we talk about the Liberator Carbine, it's pretty terrible in my opinion. It's just a fire rate toggle to the normal Liberator, and I prefer my Liberator to be a little more accurate. And I have no intention of turning this thing into burst mode and making it shoot slower. That literally defeats the purpose of this gun. It is fun to shoot zombies with, but that's where my enjoyment of the Liberator Carbine ends. Next up, the throwing knives can be pretty hilarious and have a skill curve because the reticle isn't centered for whatever reason. But in general, I don't think anybody really uses these outside of meme or challenge runs. The big key weapon that you're going to be getting here is the Bushwhacker. This is a secondary punisher, and it just feels amazing to use. Kiting pretty much anything, even hunters, which is most people's problems, feels like basically perfect and rounds any build out, and it's been my number 1 bug pistol since it came out. This thing's stagger lets you shut down pretty much anything that's chasing you and slows the game down, rounding out, again, tons of builds. So I think this Warbond gets great value when you buy it. Our next Warbond is Steel Veterans. It's the one that launched with the game. You get 3 primary weapons, the Incendiary Grenade and the God tier bot pistol, the Senator Revolver. You also get the Flexible Reinforcement Booster that is just +5 respawns, which is almost never used unless you're playing like the Eradicate Barrage style builds where the disposables. They also just recently buffed the incendiary grenade to last like quite a bit longer on the ground. I have the clip running in the background of like how long it lasts. I think it's like 19 seconds or whatever. But moving on, the explosive liberator comes in as the super niche weapon for most people. I think I really like it on the bugs. It's like mid on the bots as a fun support tool, but it's absolutely horrendous on the squids and struggles with pretty much everything despite being able to shoot forever. Next up is the fire shotgun that took over during bug patrols, and it is great at blasting pretty much every light target in the game, and it's super thematic to blast zombies with a fire shotgun. But since it got nerfed down to 4 magazines, it'll be ripping through ammo faster than when you bend over and rip your new undies after Christmas dinner. Finally, we have the Dominator. This is Helldivers' version of a bolt gun, and most people really love using it, especially with PP armor for the handling. It can actually kill every single enemy in the game depending on how hard you want to try. And I think it's a super cool, fun, and just a thematic weapon just to bring in and start blasting with. But the main reason I think for picking up this Warbond is the Senator. You can flare it when you hold down your reload, which is such a nice little touch. And it also has heavy penetration at AP4, which lets you cook off Hulk eyes, and it's most people's go-to bot pistol. It's also great for handling pretty much every medium elite in the game from every faction, and in general, it's just one of the best pistols to fall back on, and I know a ton of people, including myself, just love using it. So the Steel Vets gets a ton of value and is a higher priority mainly for the pistol. Next up, though, we do have Cutting Edge, which used to be our rank 2 Warbond, but just got outclassed recently. You get 3 awesome primaries, the Last Pistol, the Stun Grenade, and Arc Armor. Unfortunately, the booster is just completely useless again. I'm already playing for kills, and if you are trying to get less spawns, it only delays call-ins by 10%. So with them being about 90 seconds after the main objective finishes, you're looking at a cool 9 to 10 seconds. So it's just completely useless. I also linked the extensive testing posts because there's a ton of new players in the description if you just want to know how call-ins work. They are mostly the same. It's very well written and it kind of breaks down everything. So that's just linked down below for you already. And moving on to the arc resistance armor, it's really solid and prevents you from being CC'd by arc damage now with the most recent buff. In our Thickle Tesla build, we showed it arcing through teammates, and it just lets you extend your freedom zapping, and it's just a really fun armor to use when you're playing a really thematic build with your friends and everybody's using electricity. Now, the sickle is just an amazing weapon and is one of the better horde blasters in the game. It's tons of fun to use and highly rated on all of my tier lists. It's just amazing on all 3 factions and rounds out pretty much all of my like anti-tank builds when I need just a really high ammo capacity primary, because it effectively has infinite ammo as long as you just don't spray it the heat all the way down. Plasma Punisher is an interesting one that feels really bad on the bots and bugs in my opinion, because it just kind of pushes things around compared to its other plasma counterparts, which just straight up kill them so much easier. But I think it's insanely good on the squids and racks tons of kills up super fast on all the zombies and has tons of ammo to play around with. So because you're always engaging at like short medium, it just gets even better. The Blitzer is also really solid at bugs and squids. It has 2 fire modes. If you aim in, it'll focus like less things, and if you hip fire, it'll spread out more, and it's up to you to figure out how to use it properly. There's a lot of terrain interactions and weird things that can happen depending on your fire mode, but the more you use it, the better it gets. You also get the Last Pistol, which is an amazing sidearm. It's gotten buffed a couple of times, so it's really solid for kiting. And even though it looks kind of ridiculous, you can light stuff on fire with the laser ticks, and it ends up doing really solid damage. The stun grenades also let you completely pause the game, and it's just amazing for setting up stratagems or defending turrets. I personally prefer gas for that now, but these are still like super clutch sometimes. Overall, I think this is one of the best Warbonds in the game because it gives you a ton of playable options that I know a lot of people love. And when we broke this one down on stream, a lot of people's mains loadouts revolved around this Warbond. But for me, it still got put behind our new top 3, and the Urban Legends Warbond is just an amazing treat to lock in with. The new siege armor that you get out of this is absolutely insane. It makes so many primary weapons just feel amazing to use, and it's a must-take for me when I'm playing the squids and bugs now. It's also super bulky and looks amazing, so it's definitely my vibe for armor that I usually wear, and the light armor has top-down move speed, so it just feels good to play in. You also get the Armed Resupply Pods booster, which is just a fun little extra turret, like a good for a domain expansion kind of build. The Liberator on the supply box actually surprised me quite a bit, and I thought it was pretty okay. And unfortunately, it is better than most of the boosters in the game, which is kind of funny. Moving on to the Directional Shield, it had some surprising technology that I think should be left in the game. Basically, if you stem and hold R and B on an emplacement, it pops the shield up, and that's the kind of bug that should become a feature, because it's literally the only reason to take in the Directional Shield. And because when you're walking around with it, you still take impact, so you just get ragdolled, and it completely defeats the purpose of even having this thing. It's also supposed to go with the stun lance because it's like a Spartan themed warbond, and I think this thing is ridiculously fun to use. And I always talk about how important it is for people to learn how to melee, because just with normal weapons, it staggers them off of you. But nobody does it for some reason. It's really weird. And this secondary promotes meleeing, so I really like that. Plus, it stuns, which makes it super easy to just lock like elites down, and this really rewards you for going for weak points. Unfortunately, when we talk about the Flame Sentry, I don't think it's that great. The way its AI shoots, like, forces it to shoot into the ground most of the time. So if it's not on a hill or like an extreme choke, I don't really think it gets that much value. And a lot of the times it just gets surrounded and sent to Pound Town. I also think it should probably like Sprinkler instead of whatever it's trying to do now, but it doesn't really matter because the key takeaway from this Warbond is the anti-tank emplacement. This is one of the flat-out best stratagems, if not the best stratagem in the entire game. It's super cinematic, and with 30 shots, you can basically handle any column by yourself, and it's insanely good at taking down every kind of heavy armor, even when you're just blasting elites in chaff. It just feels good to use. And if anything, you could just buy this Warbond and get the anti-tank emplacement, and you would just feel like you got insane value, but you also get that siege armor, which activates a ton of primary weapons into feeling amazing. Next up, we have what I consider to be the second best Warbond that you should always buy second in any prio list, and that's Polar Patriots. It had a rough launch, but now it has some of the best pickups in the entire game, and you get 3 of the best variants of armor for their type. Heavy throwing range is amazing. Heavy explosive resistance with recoil reduction on bots makes you borderline unkillable if played properly. And the 550 speed stealth armor, if you're a stealth gamer, are all 3 very solid armor lock-ins. Unfortunately, again, the booster just sucks. Motivational Shocks got buffed, but I think it just needs to be rolled into another booster at this point because there's no reason to ever really bring it in. But that's fine because the rest of this Warbond is stacked. The Impact Incendiary is my favorite squid grenade because the area denial helps like give you tons of space and just completely obliterate almost every zombie that you could imagine. And plus, because impact, it doesn't bounce out of the UFO spawners, which just lets you pop them. And I think it just feels really good across the board to use. Then you also get the Verdict, which in my opinion is one of the better pistols in the game. It has tons of ammo, so you can spray it into like any light thing that you can think of, and as long as you're W keying, you hit the break points to rip most things heads off. It's very good against all 3 factions if used properly, and as a pistol I use all the time on stream to round builds out when I need a fast draw pistol to drop chaff or durable targets. Plus, it just looks insanely cool, so drip checking people with it wins out most of the time for me anyways. Moving on to our primaries that we get from it, the Pummeler it's extremely mediocre and very niche. It has some tech sense for technology, for stealth, and pushes enemies around because its rounds explode on impact, letting you move things where you want for strikes, and it also CC locks light enemies, but it does take a few extra shots on medium enemies to CC them since it's nerf, and in general, I think that they should revert it back to where it was at launch, but is what it is. As for the Tenderizer, it also gets activated by Siege Armor to be an absolute beast. The faster reloaded ammo capacity remove almost all of its negatives, and it's insanely good for blasting pretty much everything that's supposed to. Its fire rate toggle for when you really need to feel like your blasted feels good, but more recently has felt way better with the addition of that audio cue to tell you when you're low in ammo so you don't empty reload, because when you do empty reload, this thing is ridiculously clunky. Finally, we have one of the pinnacle weapons of the entire game. It's like a top 2, and it's just a purifier. I think it clears pretty much everything else by a substantial amount. The AoE CC on top of the amazing damage just lets you like charge up and just 2-tap most elite enemies in the game, and the AoE lets you horde clear like a monster. Plus, if there's ever a panic situation where you need to spray down, it's not even a problem. And I would always buy this Warbond second over anything else because like you just get so many different things to play with and a lot of value out of it. But our rank 1 Warbond just opens up the most builds, play styles, and loadouts possible over anything else in the game, and that's of course Democratic Detonation. Sure, the booster Extraction Pilot, again, is just completely useless like most of the boosters in the game, and it's only good for speedrunning, but the rest of it is just completely locked in. You get medium and light armor with recoil reduction and +2 grenades, which is ridiculously strong, and I know a ton of people lock in with this armor passive all the time. I personally enjoy looking like a refrigerator, though, and use this heavy explosive resistance with recoil, because everything that could kill you on the bots gets completely shut down by this thing. And on the bugs, anytime you play Nurse or Bile Seeds, they deal explosive damage, and it basically can't kill you anymore unless you like full tank everything without stimming. Drip wise, I think you just look amazing in this Warbond, and you also get my favorite little minion hat in the game. When it comes down to the weapons, the Thermite Grenade rounds out pretty much any light support weapon that you could imagine bringing in, and is one of the main grenades that people lock in for the bots. It removes the need to bring any anti-tank and covers your build's entire need for it by itself when used properly. You also get the Adjudicator, which has been buffed pretty substantially since its launch, and with the recoil reduction armor, you can spray this thing down and pretty much constantly drop anything in front of you that's medium peen. As for the Eruptor, it's been pretty much gutted since it came out. It fills out some pretty niche builds, but I don't really like taking it against the bots or the bugs anymore. On the squids, I did find quite a few loadouts that let you push enemies around into strikes, and I actually thought it felt really good against them, but Nothing matches the big bad crossbow. This is like the main weapon you're looking for with this Warbond, and in my opinion, is definitively the best weapon in the entire game. It can kill everything and close all the spawners. The explosive damage lets you horde clear super easily, and this is another weapon that gets even better with siege armor. This is basically a one-size-fits-all tool that lets you bring any support weapon in the game, and in general, I think it feels amazing to use. There's a small learning curve to shooting some flying enemies, but in general, this weapon by itself opens up the most amount of usable content up to you. And on top of that, you also get the grenade pistol, which lets you have a sidearm for destroying spawners. And it can also be good at wiping out like call-ins or finishing off big targets with squishy bits. This also rounds out a ton of builds that activates other weapons to feel better to use when you bring it in. And that is why Democratic Detonation is my rank 1 Warbond in all of my priority lists. The options that let you choose from to have well-balanced loadouts are just completely unmatched. And that also does take us into our different priority lists, with the first one opening up the most loadouts and playstyles possible. And I think this is a really good priority list for any new or returning player to be able to enjoy just tons of different options and fun stuff the fastest. But I know a lot of people don't care about that and just want to use the absolute best stuff all the time. In that case, I think the order changes slightly. So this is the second list, and what I would personally pick up on a new account. The main reasoning here, again, is just the gas grenade is god tier against all three factions and clears the other warbonds in terms of usage. Gas does make it into almost every single one of my loadouts, unless I'm just using light arms and need thermite. And it's also important to note that if you regularly random queue, experimental infusion is just super important because it's one of those big four boosters. Now, if you do exclusively play bugs and bots, I think your two priority lists look a little bit more like this, and that way things are a little more tailored to like personal play styles, preferences, and things like that. And then as time goes on, you could just passively collect super credits and just grab everything else just for the sake of collecting. I would also like to see all of your priority lists, like what you would list them in order as, because I do think it's fun to see what everyone would take first, depending on what they like the most. Again, we put together the first priority list on stream because I thought it was important to like crowdsource the feedback to see what most people thought would be the best order to grab things in. And for the most part, most people just agreed on pretty much everything. But whatever path you end up taking, I hope this helped y'all out. And I hope you all have an amazing Christmas.